Here, in today's video, I will show you all the different ways of holding your brush for watercolor painting. This is important for, of course, the outcome, but also the process and how much you enjoy it. But we're not going to overcomplicate things today. We're going to stick to very simple shapes and make sure that you enjoy the process and get familiar with the foundations of watercolor, because this is part of our beginners watercolor series. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's get started. So let's get into it. Essentially, there are two holds that you need to know. There's the vertical hold and the slanted hold to get crisp and smooth lines. In addition, there's also the compound stroke, which essentially is a combination of the two holds, but this we'll look at a later stage. So starting with the vertical hold. The vertical hold is for fine lines and details. And it basically means you hold your brush upright. The more pressure you apply to the brush, the thicker your lines will be. Without much pressure, you will be painting with the tip only, which you can see here. This is why I like rounded brushes. You have a thin tip, but then the belly is thicker. So when you apply pressure, if we do this, you see it bends and you will have the belly spreading out and a thicker line. Now, a slanted hold, which is the second type of how you can hold your brush for watercolor, basically means you have the brush at an angle. The angle can vary, but usually it's a 45-degree angle. For most of the cases, we will get into more specifics further down the road, but essentially you want to hold it at a more or less 45-degree angle, and you're holding it to the side so that the belly of the brush is what creates washes and wider strokes. For any type of hold, make sure, in order to have steady lines and no wobbles and whatnot, make sure that you use the paper and the table to stabilize your arm, whether that's your arm or your hand, to make sure that you have an even pressure and stability. Now, in order to practice, we start with very simple shapes, as we said. So we're going to just paint some circles, and we will use the vertical technique with a little pressure, just to make sure that you also don't create wobbly lines. So you need a bit of pressure. The less pressure, the more wobbly it gets. We will do circular motions to create circles, and then using a slanted angle or hold, we will fill in the circles, because otherwise it's going to take way too long. And then later on we can use the same paper, put it aside for the next class, and we can use them as the basis for our flowers when we learn how to do petals. So the reason I'm using light colors, yellows, maybe some green, maybe some reds, is so that we can use them for our flowers later on, but obviously feel free to use any type of color. So now I use the vertical motion to create the circle, went around a couple of times. Now to fill it in, I'll just use the slanted hold, because it gives me more space on the brush. Feel free to practice as much as you like, because this is a way to get the essentials right that will help you further down the line. And here we have a case where I don't have enough water. It will help you down the line if you nail your essentials first. It doesn't need to be perfect. Watercolor is not a medium that allows you full control. We learning, part of this series is obviously learning the techniques in order to control the water, the paper, the brush, and the color and the pigment as much as we can to get the desired result, but there will always be an element of surprise with watercolor, which is actually the beauty, but it's also the frustrating thing about watercolor, which is different from maybe acrylic or oil paint, or gouache, because you build it up and there's no unexpected outcome because it dries the way that you applied it. There's no there are less surprises, let's put it that way. So watercolor does humble you from time to time, but it's also what makes it beautiful. Also, to me, like, it doesn't matter for how long you do watercolor. It's nice to practice this from time to time. Just to remember the foundations. And then maybe one more. The reason I'm not filling the entire paper is simply because we're going to reuse it later on. But of course, in the meantime, feel free to try as much as you want and practice as much as you want, as this will obviously, the more you practice, the better it gets. Because in the end, yes, there is a part that is talent, but it actually is also a lot of practicing. Can be frustrating at times, but if you stick with it, I promise you, you're gonna get better. And it's gonna be a very enjoyable hobby or project, whatever you would like to do.